That's part of the appeal of these nostalgic films from the 50s and the 80s, is that they say to us, there was a simpler time when kids were going off and playing, and they were riding bikes and they were swimming in rivers and they were befriending giant alien robots. they were putting laxatives into the milkshakes of FBI agents and stuff like that.
Hello and welcome to Popcorn Parenting, the show about movies, mythology and the Messiah. My name is James Cary and I'm joined as always by Reformed Mythologist, keep saying it doesn't sound weird, Nate Morgan Locke. Hello Nate.
Hello James.
And what movie are we looking at this week?
We're going to look at The Iron Giant.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun, very done.
Yes, it is very done. Yes, I'm happy to say I have seen The Iron Giant. I watched it with my kids very recently, so I have all kinds of insights into how my kids were slightly baffled by some of the movie. But first, before we get to that, cold hard facts. The movie from 1999, released in July, it was directed by Brad Bird, who almost needs no introduction, but he is, of course, The Incredibles' Brad Bird. And also Ratatouille. And I'll be honest, I did not care for Ratatouille. Where are you on Ratatouille?
Well, I think I'd probably prefer it to you, but yeah. It's not my favourite Pixar.
No.
But what could be?
It's pleasing, but just not very funny. However, Iron Giant also, let's be honest, not that funny. I suspect the accountants didn't find it very funny because it cost $50 million, and at the box office, it says here it only took $31 million. So I'm sure in time it's going to make its money back. Maybe 20 years later, it has. And it is, of course, based on the Ted Hughes story, The Iron Man, which is a novel from 1968. And the voices, you will hear the voices of Jennifer Aniston, Harry Connick Jr., and, of course, the giant is played by Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel, another brilliant credit.
Yeah.
From Fast and the Furious.
Yeah. I don't think he does all the clanking and creaking, but
I wouldn't put it past him.
There are some noises. So anyway, that's probably enough cold hard facts to be getting on with. Nate, in a world
drenched with suspicion and fear, a 9-year-old boy hides a giant robot from the government and asks the question, who are you?
Wow.
That's basically sort of what happens in it. I feel like I should start by giving a little bit of an apologia, a defense of The Iron Giant, because it did. You're right, it didn't make much money at the box office, but it's one of these kind of classic slow burns where it's sort of appreciated much more after its cinematic release. Yeah, and if you go on YouTube and watch sort of people are absolutely obsessed with animated films, even beyond my own interest, they will all sort of herald The Iron Giant as being a classic and Brad Bird as being a great director.
Yeah, it is a good movie. I have a lot of sympathy with that view because also I don't want to live in a world where every movie is either Marvel or a Toy Story 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. You want these other quirky side piece stories. And my own particular favourite movie like this, as it were, is Castles in the Sky, which is by that Japanese fellow. And
Studio Ghibli.
Yeah. So tell us about The Iron Giant. What are we looking for?
Right. So one of the reasons I particularly like Iron Giant is because for me it's a seasonal movie. So you know how people say, "Oh, I can't wait till Christmas because then I get to watch, Home Alone or It's a Wonderful Life or
The Great Escape."
For me, The Iron Giant. Autumn hasn't started till I've watched The Iron Giant.
Oh,
because it's set in October and it's set up in Rockwell, Maine, and color-wise, it's this kind of beautiful sort of greens and oranges and yellows and browns, and it feels like a breath of fresh air. It's a very simple film with a simple story, and the pacing's not too kind of zany and fast and all sorts of stuff. I find it a very kind of relaxing film to watch. So I think it's got that going for it, and I think the simplicity of it has got that going for it. I think design-wise, it's the design of the Iron Giant is very sort of simple and compelling. And the story, as I say, it's kind of this basic thing, but also because it's set in the 50s, it's got all this nostalgia to it. And the number of films that people are watching at the moment based on the 80s.
yeah.
This kind of yearning back for a simpler time before we had, all these terrible technologies.
When
and
life was
whatever
a
they are.
John Hughes film, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, the town's called Rockwell, which I'm not sure if there is a Rockwell, Maine. But it calls to mind Norman Rockwell, who was an American artist in the first half of the 20th century, who does these kind of classic paintings of Americana. So it's people in diners drinking milkshakes, and it's boys playing, baseball out in the street, and just very kind of simple scenes of American life. And so it has a kind of comforting feel to it, even though the sort of underlying tension for the plot is, an atomic holocaust. So that's exciting.
Yeah. So, what is the kind of the headline theme of this, though? Because, I mean, from my own reflection, and actually it's weird how we talked about the movie afterwards with my kids, and they didn't have that much to say about it other than the fact that they quite enjoyed it. And we didn't buy it. We rented it off Amazon. And so I can't see us renting it again necessarily.
Yeah.
They weren't like, we have to watch it again. But actually, since then, my daughter, my eldest, has mentioned it a couple of times. And the thing that really stuck out to her was the idea that, what is this thing? We don't understand it. Let's kill it.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the theme that particularly stayed with her. So she theoretically knows about the Cold War, which is obviously the backdrop for this. But the thing that sort of struck her was just how, why are they trying to kill the giant? And stuff, because they don't understand it. And she's like, oh, okay. So is that... Is that right?
No, absolutely. It's completely right. It raises the question of, when something unknown comes into your experience, is your first responsibility to kill it? And it fits into the same kind of story pattern as E.T. and to some degree, How to Train Your Dragon. Essentially, the young child is the only one in the community with the curiosity and the sort of concern to look after this gigantic weapon robot
killing machine,
and to treat with kindness. And so when Hogarth Hughes, when he goes out with his flashlight and his BB gun and sort of finds the Iron Giant trying to eat the power station, and then the Iron Giant gets caught up in the power cables, and watching him sort of like in pain runs over to flick the switch. I'm sure power stations don't work like that, but
they don't have a big on-off thing. Yeah.
For the purposes of the story, it's very helpful that at a height a 9-year-old boy can reach is a very simple, obvious on-off switch. So then his act of kindness and sort of his curiosity about what the giant's like then acts to give us a relationship we really care about very early on. And, what 9-year-old boy wouldn't want to have their own absolutely, remarkable robot to kind of be their friend. And so the development of the story then is this boy teaching the giant about the world in very simple ways. So he has to teach him about death at one point when some hunters shoot a deer. And what's a stone, what's a tree, all these kind of very basic things. So even though the giant has this incredible destructive potential, there's a learning experience that he can have with Hogarth, which is quite precious, and then will come, back around towards the end of the film, when, in a sense, the roles are reversed, and rather than Hogarth protecting the giant, it's about the giant protecting him.
Yeah, there is quite a strong gun thing in this as well, isn't there? And I did read in the backstory that Brad Bird's older sister was shot and killed by her estranged husband in a murder-suicide. And while coping with the tragedy, Bird decided to adjust the story of the film to include a message of anti-gun violence. Having seen the movie, I sort of buy it, but it doesn't feel preachy in the same way that when we talked about where they go off to space, Wall-E. That could have been a very environmental movie, and it just sort of isn't really. Yeah,
and I don't think it is. It raises the question of what is it that turns someone into a weapon, makes someone a criminal? Is it what they are sort of are in themselves? What's this robot been created for? And what's kind of funny is that you never actually know. You sort of, that's all kept. And yet he has this potential to become sort of a destroyer of nations. So the fact that he reacts badly when Hogarth points a little 1950s style space pistol at him, and then has to be defended, Hogarth has to be rescued, you sort of think, oh, okay, there's this, no pun intended, but trigger that happens to the Iron Giant that's going to make him behave in a particular way. And so Hogarth has to sort of learn, okay, how do I deal with the nature of this beast? In the same way as if we have pets at home, then our children have to learn what kind of animal is this, and what can it learn to do, and what would it do if it was completely sort of left to its own devices or mistreated. It could turn on you.
There is death and resurrection, isn't there? In this movie, which Christians obviously would be very happy about. Yeah. But what are Christians missing? What is some Christian mythology that's swirling around this film?
In one sense, when we've done these films, we've sort of tried to avoid the sacrificial substitutional atonement thing. We've not because it's not central to the gospel, but because if that's the only thing we can see that's Christian in any film, then we'll have a very superficial time in cinema, and our kids will never learn to see the other elements of the gospel story that are played out.
And also, if you can't see that theme in this movie, you're probably facing in the wrong direction.
So I think one of the key themes that comes out of it is this question of someone's ability to choose their identity. Now, that sounds very loaded when you say it in 2020 with all the sort of stuff around gender and race and all that sort of stuff. But in this film, in 1999, when the theme of the movie is this sentence, "You are who you choose to be," it's very clear that within the context of the film, that's about whether the Iron Giant is going to be Atomo, the gigantic weapon that he saw in Hogarth's comics, or he's going to be Superman and he's going to rescue the world. And that dilemma for the Iron Giant is, am I built to destroy things, or am I built to protect things? And what's key is that the biggest impact on the Iron Giant is the care, the compassion of Hogarth. So his treatment is what effectively turns the Iron Giant into this sort of protecting character who chooses to be Superman. And I think that's very powerful for us as Christians. Now, you've got the question, can we, of our own choice, decide not to be sinful. No, we can't.
No.
We can't. You can't.
We can answer that one.
You can't beat the sinful nature just by
Willpower.
a decision of the will. What you need is the sort of regenerating power of the Spirit applying the gospel to you. That's actually what it takes. But in one sense, it is the application of Hogarth's love which changes the giant's sort of perspective and view of himself. One of the other things which is interesting is this question of the alien that comes to Earth that people might just think, well, let's kill it.
Yeah.
Which is if you take the Iron Giant as a Christ figure coming to a world which doesn't understand it, well, what is it that happens to
the world comprehendeth it not.
Yes. So if we're going to understand the giant as the Christ figure, which clearly at the end of the film, when he goes up and he deals with this missile, he is acting as a Christ type in sacrificing himself and his resurrection sort of at the end of the film. It's interesting to look at, well, what did people want to do with God when he came to Earth? And so your daughter's question, like, why do we want to destroy that which is different or that which is unknown? Or it's like, because that's what the sinful nature does. That's the madness of the crowds that sort of overwhelms anything which exposes it. But interestingly, the conversations we had with my kids, we've obviously seen it a few times because we watch it almost every year. But this year, the conversation was about the suspicion and fear of international espionage and the Sputnik satellite, which is going round, right? And so you've got all these townspeople sitting in the diner and basically saying, these Russians, they can see what we're doing. They're sending these satellites up into space and they're looking down on us. This is in the 1950s. And you think, okay, 2020, what's the conversation? The conversations are the Russians meddling in, foreign elections. Is China trying to spy on everyone through their phones and stuff? None of which answers any of those questions or not, but it just says, no, there is a sense of fear that you're being watched, that you are potentially being manipulated by nefarious, agents, and I think that's something that I've found with our kids has been an interesting conversation around use of the internet, and thinking, well, what is it? Who's playing who?
Yeah.
Are you playing the game or is the game playing you? And then the questions about if you're not paying for a service, you're the product.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a documentary on Netflix at the moment called The Social Dilemma, which fairly typical in terms of saying, hey, are we all using our phones too much? That conversation we've all been having for the last 5 years at least. But what makes this one interesting is that it's about ex-employees of Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, telling you what they were doing in their meetings, deciding what your phone was going to do. So every nudge, every notification you get has been intentionally designed to grab your attention and not let you go.
Yeah.
And
this is on Netflix. And
exactly,
and the head of Netflix has publicly said, our main competitor is not Amazon Prime or HBO. It is the human need for sleep.
So
hiding in plain sight. That's what that is.
Yeah, and that's one of those questions. If you play it back into the Iron Giant, the 1950s, during early parts of the Cold War, is a time of great fear of forces outside of our control. And if you told people in the 1950s what we would all be walking around with in our pockets and what we'd be using to conduct our lives, they would be horrified. They'd be like, what on earth is going on?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the appeal of these nostalgic films from the 50s and the 80s, is that they say to us, there was a simpler time when kids were going off and playing, and they were riding bikes and they were swimming in rivers and they were befriending giant alien robots. They were putting laxatives into the milkshakes of FBI agents and stuff like that. Which, in one sense, that's what I love about the films, the simplicity of it, which is like a childhood prank. Yeah. And then, some of it you're like, yeah, you couldn't actually do a film about that now. So the fact that the FBI guy puts a handkerchief over Hogarth's face with chlorophyll or chloroform.
Chloroform,
I'm not a chemist, but so drugs this 9-year-old boy, and you think, oh my goodness, this is like a big deal. But somehow, in the context of this film, you're like, yeah, obviously, he's the bad guy. He's going to drug a 9-year-old boy and then sit in his bedroom that he's rented in this boy's house, staring at him while he goes to sleep. And we're all going to be like, yeah, that's a perfectly normal thing to expect.
Although it comes to something when you're watching The Iron Giant and you're just thinking, mass killing robot comes down from space, discovered by boy. Hey, what? He's playing on his own out in the woods.
Yeah.
Pull the other one. It's like, wow, that's the bit you don't believe.
That's the bit you can't believe.
Yeah. I love the idea, and I think we should introduce this idea to our listeners, in that it feels like, on one level, we're saying, or the practice is, we watch a movie, we discuss it, we move on. But the idea that you watch a movie, you watch it again a couple of years later, and different presenting issues, you notice different things, but they're different now. The times have changed. You've changed. Your kids are older. It's a different day of the week. Maybe you watched it on a Tuesday night, and next time you watch it on a Sunday afternoon, and it's as if it's a slightly different movie, and different things are going to come out. And I think we should be thinking, how can we have a conversation? So there may be a film that they're not ready for, and I'd be interested to watch this movie, or actually Castles in the Sky again with my kids, which I bought on DVD because I liked it so much. And I remember when I first saw that movie, it was the 80s, and so a movie came on TV. You're never going to find that movie. You don't even have any way of knowing. Did you write down any of the names from the credits? No, you didn't.
Yeah,
you're going to have to go to a public library and go through books of movies, of animations, pore over it. You know what I mean? It's just a quest.
But what you didn't realise, James, when you were doing that in the public library, that librarians were passing on your library details to the government.
Yeah.
And so they were tracking every single book and film that you were taking out from the library.
Oh
it's all there, James.
It's all there.
And at any time, they can just turn it back on you, and they will. They will turn it back on you.
But what I mean by that is just the long way around of saying it's fun to go back to these movies and to watch them again later and have a different conversation. I think that's a really positive, helpful thing to do, isn't it? I think there is a preachiness, especially in modern films, which won't stand the test of time. And that also, though, ties in with the fact that Christians, who are often slightly behind the curve, culturally speaking, and are suspicious of Hollywood and of storytelling generally, and what we're used to is the unambiguously messianic figure of Aslan, who is Jesus. He just is. You know what I mean? As in, he's. But whereas actually, what is much more normally the case is you do have characters who are Jesus-like at times. So at the beginning of the movie, the Iron Giant is this unknown, but he's also this very powerful thing. He's also presumably soulless, and actually throughout this, he finds his soul. Well, Jesus didn't do that. A skeptical Christian might just go, "Oh, so he's not Jesus then? Oh, so why is he being Jesus at the end of the movie?" And actually, if you do that one-dimensional thing, unless you're a total genius like C.S. Lewis, you're not going to do it. Which is why in The Lord of the Rings, written by another genius, although not without quite the brevity genius that his friend Lewis had, is you have Gandalf, who is a bit Jesus-like, and you've got Strider, Aragorn, who is also sort of Jesus-like. Which one's Jesus? Neither and both, and that's okay.
Yeah, and Frodo. I mean, and the thing is, I once did a series of evangelistic talks between the full extended versions of Lord of the Rings in one day. So who wants to listen to an evangelistic talk in the middle of watching all of the Lord of the Rings film?
Even on paper, that's not a great idea.
I mean, I enjoy watching the films. It was nice to prepare the talks, but it was to say, okay, with Frodo, you've got the suffering servant. You've got the one who is just so familiar with suffering, struggling through, and he's not particularly appealing, but he's the guy who's going to bring the salvation. You've then got Strider / Aragorn, who is the
promised king.
The surprising king, and then Gandalf, the grey to Gandalf the white, does your whole kind of
Moses, Elijah.
The exalted, resurrected Christ. But I completely agree, and I think with the Iron Giant, if we're talking to our kids, and they will be able to see that when the Iron Giant lifts up from the snowy town centre, and Hogarth just looks up and says, "I love you," and as he goes off to do that, it's like, oh, the giant's like Jesus. And then you could sort of say, well, are there other points at which other characters do Christ-like things? And then isn't it remarkable that when we read through the Bible, we see Jesus performing the archetypal version of all of these things? And that's why he's sort of so difficult to write. You can't, because you'll get some part of him awkward and wrong, and you'll fall off the horse either way.
And that's why we get 4 Gospels that have 4 Jesuses who are obviously recognisably the same person, and yet completely, favouring different aspects of his character. Why he came, who he is, I'm deep diving into John's Gospel at the moment, and it's just it's incredible, and how different John is from the other Gospels is astonishing, and yet it is obviously the same man.
Yeah, and but seeing the giant as this a go-to example for the saviour of the people, who takes the bomb to himself, that they might be rescued, they might be safe, and something so interesting in the way that that's set up is the fact that the American army and government are all apparently thinking this giant must have come from the Russians, and so their solution then is, well, let's blow him up along with this entire town. And so they sort of killing themselves in a way, and it's sort of their missile is laid on him, and he sort of protects them from themselves in a way, which is just an interesting sort of theme to put in.
Brilliant. Well, as usual, when you talk to your kids, just say, what was your favourite bit? What was your favourite character? What did you think? And go from there. We don't need lots of setup questions. You're not trying to run a Bible study. You watched a movie and now you're talking about it. And hopefully there are some themes there that are more than just, isn't he a bit like Jesus at the end? Which, yes, he is. But if that's all you come up with, or if that's the first thing you start with, then actually I don't think you're really quite doing justice to the film.
But know that giving your kids just another illustration of what Christ is doing for us on the cross is very helpful, and maybe one that with the right kind of tweaks on it. So we're not saying it's exactly the same. With the right understanding and context, they can be able to say, what I felt when the giant sacrifices himself to protect the citizens of Rockwell. That feeling, that sense of awe and wonder is a taste of what I should feel when I'm, hearing about Christ's redeeming love for me.
And actually, the most powerful moment for me was not that moment, was the resurrection. Was that moment of like, wow, that's a really satisfying ending. He died. That's great. And then it's just like, oh,
yeah,
he's coming back together again. Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
You're done. That for me, that was the exhilaration. So exhilaration at the resurrection is something that I don't think our Christian tribe do particularly well. We tend to be jubilant at the crucifixion rather than awestruck by the resurrection, I think. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the vindication of what's happened on Good Friday with Easter Sunday is something that we should rejoice in, and the new life that it calls us into. So clearly the Iron Giant's resurrection is great. Really pleased that all these little bits of robot have all sort of
crawling its way back,
gone off to Iceland or something. But there's something really life-giving to us in Christ's resurrection, and pulls us forward to a new future and a new life that we can live. But yes, as I say, I can only commend the Iron Giant to people and say you should watch it in October, and you should watch it every October.
Well, there we go.
Good way to go.
Thanks very much, Nate.
Thank you, James.
Speak to you next time. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
So I've used the word oeuvre. There it is. There it is.
Does that mean egg?
No, that's
isn't it?
Yeah, yes,
Sorry.
right. No, we'll edit that bit out to make you sound intelligent.